Coming up in this episode of Lee Can't Help Himself. Fish nerds versus the techno hippies.
Wow.
Stinky fish.
Oh, it stinks.
Freestyle desoldering. The wrong bit melts.
Melt.
What happens next?
Look, if that's not good enough to keep you watching, I don't know what is. A while ago, Mike DX off the Twitter asked me if I'd be interested in repairing 3 Sega Game Gears. The sweetener was I'd get to keep one. Of course, I jumped at the chance, and here they are. They're in various stages of broke, ranging from a bit to how on earth did this stay out of the bin all these years? But all of them have a red light, and from my research findings, this is promising. The usual fix for most Sega Game Gears you'll come across is to replace the capacitors and hope the leaking electrolytic fluids haven't caused too much damage. With that in mind, I ordered 3 capacitor kits from eBay and then did some research. Retro 6 offer kits comprising of ceramic capacitors. Now, there are 2 very distinct camps when it comes to the type of capacitor you should use to replace the leaking ones inside a Game Gear. The original ones being removed are all electrolytic. This type of cap is polarized, meaning the current can only flow in one direction through them. The alternative is to use ceramic surface-mounted capacitors. Camp Electrolytic, who definitely all smell of fish, will point out the original circuit was designed with electrolytic capacitors in these positions for a reason, and you should respect that. And they would be right. Camp Ceramic, who are definitely all hippies, would reply, "Chill out, man, it's an old machine and ceramic caps seem to work just fine. Pass the tofu salad." I didn't know what to make of all this, so I trusted Retro 6, the website where I found the ceramics, to know what they were talking about. You just have to trust someone with such a lovely head of hair. And so I ordered 3 sets of ceramic capacitor replacement kits from Retro 6. Let's dig in. I won't be showing you every single replacement capacitor from all 3 Game Gears. That would be very boring for everyone involved. But for those interested in the process, let's take this first machine, which is machine number 1, with the faulty screen and no sound, and run through the process. Taking these apart is fairly simple. 5 Phillips screws and 1 game bit screw are quickly dispatched. The 2 halves of the case are now free to separate, but it's important to open it from the bottom edge as the cables connecting the power and the soundboard are along the top edge. This is my very first time looking inside one of these, so it's worth taking a few notes about what's what. That bit there is the power board. It connects into the battery compartment and has the power jack for an external power supply. This bit is the soundboard. The larger plug connects it to the main board and the smaller one connects it to the speaker hidden below. This big chunk of metal here with the scary voltage warnings is where the screen and its associated backlight live. And just below the slab of black plastic is the cartridge port. The capacitors I'm here to change are hidden inside these black plastic blocks. By this stage in their life, all of these are leaking now, and if you own or know of a Game Gear that has not had the capacitors inside replaced, it would be a good idea to get these hidden nightmares removed. The fluid inside these is corrosive over time, and given enough time will slowly spread to more delicate components and eat them. I did say they were nightmares. Okay, next up is pop out the connectors on the power and soundboards to separate the halves. I'll be replacing the capacitors on the power board too, so that needs to come out. This piece of plastic is stuck on here and just needs to be pried off to allow the board to come free of the case. Unlike all the other caps we'll see, the power board ones are standard through-hole radial types and don't seem to have leaked. I'll be replacing them anyway as they're in the kit and it certainly won't hurt to put new ones in. This crustiness is probably a reflow of the power switch. It's a high stress joint and I'm sure these are a common point of failure. Just a couple of screws hold the soundboard in place.
Ooh. nasty.
Is it bad? Let's have a look then.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
All of this has been bathed in cap juice, and corrosion is everywhere. It's even on the legs of this chip here. The only way to tell if there's any actual damage is to remove these nasty cans of acid doom. Yes, I know it's not actually acid. Get back in your box. Little wonder there's no sound coming from this unit. First, the main board. These four here are in reasonable condition with no sign of corrosion. This larger one over here has started to leak, but it isn't too bad. This one here at C3 is showing signs of spillage, as is its neighbour at C1. On the other side of the board, these last two caps look to be intact, for now. I'll be starting with the two on the other side of the board. It's a new system to me, and I don't fully know what to expect. So working out the kinks on a couple of good condition caps in lots of space is a good idea. All of these square cap cases are glued to the board. Before I try to remove them, I need to break that seal. The method I'll use for all of these is to cut the legs off and then remove the remains with a hot iron. The key here is not to put too much stress on the pads. I don't want to rip one from the board.
Oh, it stinks.
Oh yes, the smell. It's bad. Really bad. Solder wick to mop up the mess. Doesn't look so good right now, and I must admit I wondered if I'd done more damage than I wanted to. But most of this is glue and electrolytic fluid and burning. IPA and a toothbrush remove the worst, and a scrub with a cotton bud the rest. Those pads actually look pretty good. Right, time to speed things up. All the rest are pretty much exactly the same. Some are more corroded, some are bigger, some are smaller, but they all need to come out. You can see here the cap inside the plastic casing is just a regular radial capacitor. Rumour has it Sega obtained the method of making their own capacitors by nefarious means. The rumour goes on to that's a word, right? That there was a mistake in the formula for the electrolytic fluid, which has led to all of these spilling their guts over the years. I don't know how true that is, but it's a cool story and I like to believe there's something to it. All the caps are off now, so it's time to clean up and smell the fish. In the end, the pads on this one were all in really good condition. Oh wait, missed one. There, all done. The kits from Retro 6 have handy guides showing where all the capacitors go, available on their website. It's just a case of following a plan and double checking you have the right value cap. Once they're out of the packaging, it's harder to tell what each value is, so I start with a single value and fit all of those in one go. Good solder is very important for this type of work, but more important is good flux. My favourite Topnic branded flux is great here, just a dab with the brush is all it needs. With flux applied and the capacitors held in place with a pair of tweezers, I wet the end of the iron with a small amount of fresh solder and touch the pad and cap at the same time. The flux in the solder has long burned away, but the flux I've applied to the board is going to do the job of flowing the solder onto the capacitor and pad in a nice neat fillet. For this capacitor tucked into the corner next to the power cable, my usual chisel tip iron won't be suitable. I can get to one side, but the side closest to that blue connector is going to be a problem. I have this conical tip, which I don't like to use, and that seems to do the job well enough. But later you'll see I switched to a needle tip for all of the work. and that makes the whole thing much easier.
Sweet.
The next value caps are much smaller packages, but using the same principles they go on easy enough. There are different methods of soldering SMD components. A popular method is to tin one pad, which you then melt and slide the component into place. I don't like that way, and I'll tell you why. To get the cap or resistor or whatever it is into place with one hand while holding heat on the pad is tricky, sometimes requiring you hold the heat there for longer than I would like. After a second or two, the flux you had will have burned away, so any extra time risks a poor joint. Holding the component in place with one hand does require a steady hand, but it always gives a great joint and almost always ends with a nicely aligned job. And that's all the caps fitted to the main board. Some of the glue is still visible. I could spend time scraping it away, but there's little point, and I have lots of caps to install on these three machines. Next up is the power board. Back on very familiar ground here. For this one, I'm going with melting the solder on each leg of the cap and walking it out of the board. There are some nice chunky ground planes on this board, and getting the solder removed from that hole is proving tricky. Heat is being pulled away really efficiently. More drastic measures are required. Here's a method I first saw on the excellent Happy Little Diodes channel. It always works. It's awkward though, and again requires a steady hand. Simply put, heat the joint from one side and apply the solder sucker to the other. Perfect. With that out, the rest is pretty much plain sailing. One thing I did do here was increase the heat on my iron to around 380 to help flow the solder down into the vias. Lovely, everything looks better after an isopropanol scrub. The last bit of the puzzle is the soundboard, and this is a very good illustration of what happens to surface mounted electrolytic capacitors in certain machines. The Sega Game Gear was released in 1990, 32 years ago now. There are other machines of that vintage that are in similar peril. The Amiga 1200, 600 and CD32 spring to mind. All of these, if left untouched, will be steadily dissolving from the inside out in their own nasty fish juice. The first problem I face here is to get these caps off the board. My usual method, and the one I favour, is to use two irons with pointed tips in a pincer move to heat both pads at the same time. The downside of that method is if the pads are so badly corroded, the solder will refuse to flow without excessive heat. The fresh solder really isn't interested in flowing with the old stuff. If anything, it's just sitting on top of the crust. You can see here, the bit at the bottom just falls off when I accidentally knock it.
Melt.
I've already heated this more than I feel comfortable, and it's not interested in moving.
It's not melting. Nope.
Plan B. I don't like doing this. What can happen by cutting through the can is the legs can pull the pads right off the board. Another thing that can happen with two irons is it's very easy to melt things you don't want to, as controlling both irons at the same time is difficult. Plastic parts like this connector, for instance.
Oh.
Oops.
That's bad.
Ouch. Calm down, take a breath. It might be okay.
I think we got lucky.
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I think we got lucky.
The legs inside the capacitor must have corroded so badly they just broke away from the parts, still encased in solder on the pads. And fortunately for me, the pads are still intact. A clean up and scrub with IPA reveals two pads in surprisingly decent condition.
Yeah, it's all there.
You lucky, lucky bastard. I don't want to cut the cap again, so now I'm trying to remove some of the surface corrosion to give the solder a chance to stick and flow. Okay, that went better, but it still took much longer than I would like. Again, it took more effort and heat than I would like, but it's off. More scratching away crud. That's all the caps are off. The board looks a bit of a mess. Time to clean it up. One of the ceramic caps fell off all by itself here. Surely not my fault. All the pads turn out to be in excellent condition. A very fortunate state of affairs. You see me install these on the main board. Let's whiz through these ones. Ah, yes, the one that tried to escape. Now all the new caps are installed, it's time to test. We have a better picture and sound, but the screen is unfortunately faulty. Not much can be done about this, apart from replacement. Mike has asked if I'll upgrade one of these with a modern IPS screen, so this is now the prime candidate. We'll be seeing more of this one in the next episode. This is console number 2. It has no image, but does have sound. All the mainboard caps have leaked, some worse than others. The power board looks fine. The soundboard has already been capped. I know that Mike said he'd previously attempted replacing the capacitors in one of these, so this must be his handiwork. He did point out this was an early attempt using unsuitable tools and materials, and he's learned a lot since then. So I'll spare Mike's blushes and scoot past this soundboard. I will just say that in the end I had to repair a lifted pad, which I don't think was his fault. There were signs of major corrosion, and later I ended up replacing the whole thing, as that corrosion had worked its way underneath the speaker connector and rotted out one of the pins. I suspect Mike also recapped the power board, and I'm happy to leave that work as it is. No need to replace new caps. The only thing worth noting here is I found this needle tip work much better than my chisel tip for this type of soldering.
Oh, that actually works really well.
All of that went really well. No damage needed to be repaired and the caps installed without issues. But is it fixed? Remember, this one had sound but no picture. Nice! And this one has a better picture than the other one. The sound is good too.
I can see it, you can't.
Okay, last one. Number 3. Dim screen, no sound. This is the console that's in the best cosmetic condition. The plan is for this one to be restored to working condition, and then Mike will keep it as a nice minty example. Inside, the soundboard caps are not too terrible. In fact, these two here are in good condition. The rest have leaked the usual mess all over the place. The power board looks good, and the main board is mostly good with only the very beginning of leaks on some of the caps. But they will leak, so they're all coming out. Recap montage number 3. Phew, that went super well. Very straightforward due to the good condition of the pads. So that soundboard should be a simple matter too, right? Oh no, not this time. I picked this small cap thinking it was an easy target, but no, I was confident the solder was flowing beneath it, but it didn't want to move.
Come on. Go. Bad things are happening under there. Why would you glue the pot down? They've glued the pots down. Why would you do that?
Well, there's probably a good reason. Vibration in a mobile device and all that, but it does seem extreme. It's going to make removing these a massive pain. I could heat them with hot air, but they'll almost certainly explode before the glue gives way. And so we're back to the ugly way. The faint-hearted should look away now. Even when you're doing something you're not comfortable doing, there's always an opportunity to learn from it. In normal circumstances, I would never recommend cutting caps off of boards. But if you need to, it's worth taking your time, snipping into the casing all around to relieve the pressure on the pads, and try to cut the legs inside so that the whole thing comes away clean-ish. Bad things can happen, almost anything. Be prepared for the unexpected.
Ow, hit me right in the head.
Did it knock any sense into you?
Yeah, you think you've won.
The glue residue made this one harder to mop up the solder, but in the end it all came off. The power board went as planned, and it's time for testing once more.
Good time. Sega. Come on. Oh.
And
Garbage.
oh, try the cartridge.
Ha. Dirty slot.
Ew. And this one looks to be the best so far. You can tell by the hairy man grinning in the reflection. 30 minutes seems like long enough. I'm sure you have things you need to be doing now. But stay tuned to the channel for future stuff. I have more quick fix videos coming up and a second part to this Game Gear nonsense where I fix Dudley of Yesterzine's Game Gear and upgrade the first unit you saw in this video with a posh case and fancy IPS screen. Don't ask me when I'll be doing that though. Editing these takes forever. Well done for making it to the end of the video.
What happens next? Okay, that'll do.
Wow.